Hello, Homebrewed Christianity listeners. This is Trip.
This is Bo.
And today you get to hear from Kester Brewin, Barry Taylor, all live podcastery fun at Monkish Brewing Company. But first, we want to tell you something super duper special. Do you know what it is, Bo?
I have no idea.
We're glad that they're listening. That's right, the listeners to the Homebrewed podcast. We call them deacons.
Yes.
We try to elevate the status of the listener, and here's the reason why. We want you to take the ingredients from the awesome interviews we get with scholars, philosophers, theologians, biblical teachers, and the like, and brew your own faith. One that tastes good, that's packed full of awesome sauce and zestiness.
So we provide a wide assortment of ingredients here on the podcast, and most of the time it's stuff we're pretty excited about, stuff that's somewhere in our wheelhouse. But once in a while, like today, we bring in somebody who provides an ingredient that maybe you and I, it's not our main thing.
Well, Kester, I was told by Khaled called me and said Kester was awesome. So who knows, Bo?
Yep.
He's going to turn you into a radical theologian today.
Let Sleeping Gods Die is the name of the event. Which
begs the question, what does a sleeping god snore like?
I guess so.
Uh-huh.
Questions that you don't normally hear.
Yeah, maybe you'll find out next week when Peter Rollins and Barry Taylor get on the podcast to talk a little more about sleeping gods and their impending death. But in the meantime, head over to homebrewedchristianity.com. Connect with us on Twitter. That's right, at Trip Fuller and at
The Bo Sanders.
That's right. He adds "the" in front of his name.
Because I'm from Ohio, and they say The Ohio State University.
I guess. And you can find us on the Facebook. But mostly, we want you to go to the website, and we want you to click on that little glowing mic on the side, the speak pipe, speak pipe, speak pipe. I was setting up for you to tell us about this. We want you to go click on the speak pipe.
It's this little icon on the right-hand side of the screen. It looks like a microphone. You click it, and a magical thing happens. Inside your computer, your microphone comes on.
Yeah.
And then you talk to us. And, and then it sends us an MP3 that we can use later. Because for those who don't know, if they're new to the podcast, this is the stream where we interview authors and thinkers.
Correct.
But we have another show called the Theology Nerd Throwdown, which is what they're listening to next week.
Yep.
Yeah, alternate between them. And that's you and I chatting.
Well, and here's the thing. Like, if they went over there, they would hear a call from Will Clapp and then hear about Homebrewed going to AAR with Catherine Keller and John Cobb making a live experience
this fall
at the American Academy of Religion on Friday night. They would hear us talk to Shane about genocide and liberation theology in the book of Joshua.
Oh, my.
Talk to Will Hook. He calls and he says, look, fellas, I get the whole we should have a generous orthodoxy and we're not our ideas on Facebook and that kind of thing, but there might be more than one Christianity because my conservative evangelical friends think I'm a heretic and might be going to hell. And we fix his problem. That's what we do, Bo.
Yeah.
We fixed it. He called, he cried, and it all happened. Brecky talks to us about the incarnation. All that's this week. Pamela, a living Calvinist, calls with a shout-out. And anytime we can get a Calvinist to listen, even just one walks down that Cobbian aisle to process theology, and that's a good work. Anyway, so head on over to the SpeakPipe and the website. Remember to subscribe and review. And also, two big things headed your way. One was the AAR thing, and we mentioned, with Cobb and Keller at AAR. Number dos, the Christology online class is just about to start on the 4th of September for 6 weeks in a row.
So it's 6 Thursday nights.
Yep.
And you get reading ahead of time.
Correct.
And then you have an online conversation about it.
Yep. And with me and Peter Rollins, we're going to talk about Karl Barth this week.
Oh, my.
Some Bultmann, some Pannenberg. That's right. Anyway, there's plenty more to Sabrino. Anyway, so you can go sign up for the class, stream it live. If you've missed a week, you can still download the audio and video of the past ones, join on the rest. And, So last but not least, we need to tell our friend Travis hi. Travis from Work of the People.
Workofthepeople.com.
Ooh, it's a great website.
One of the best websites of resources out there. If you are looking to engage, like we do, authors and thinkers, the packages that they put together of those video clips and curriculum are amazing. They have whole liturgy things, backgrounds for worship music. It's a fantastic website.
See? And if you just go over there and check it out, you can find videos of all these sweet different thinkers to use for your small group. backgrounds to the worship songs and stuff, but make sure you let Travis know that you're a homebrewed Christianity deacon that came to visit. You can try it out free for a month, too. Tell Travis hi, because we like people who sponsor the podcast. Bo, how else can I sponsor the podcast?
You can go to the website, and you can sponsor us by just clicking a button. And you can donate as much as it would take to buy us a pint, which we always appreciate. Or through PayPal, you can sponsor the podcast, which is fantastic for us because it helps us pay the fees for hosting and all the various things that we do. And so we want to say thank you to Susan St. Lawrence. Her and her husband, Mark, are amazing deacons. They come to so many live events. They're so supportive. They help share stuff on Facebook. They're wonderful.
And they were at this live event at Monkish Brewing Company.
Let Sleeping Gods Die.
In Torrance, California, with Kester Brewin, Barry Taylor, and Peter Rollins. So
the one you're about to listen to.
The one you're about to listen to. So there you go. Buckle your safety belt, because this doesn't just start out like any podcast. This is a live one. And it's a rambunctious one.
Man, I love our live events.
And
I'm
Barry Taylor played a special song to set up for Kester's talk. So I feel like that's the time you've arrived.
I will look forward to this. I'm sorry that I missed it, but I will look forward to hearing this.
All right.
Hello, Homebrew Christianity listeners. This is Tripp, and I am here in Monkish Brewing Company in Torrance, California, with the sexiest collection of theology nerds who are about to say, what, nerd out with your geek out. Are you ready to yell nerd out with your geek out? This is important participation. All right, so we were going to do it. There's a collection of theology nerds right here in a brewery, and they're about to tell you what's up. 1, 2, 3. Nerd out with your geek out. Exactly. That's what's about to happen. And this is a special evening because, normally you have to listen to Americans' accents, but today we have 3 different people with 3 different accents that aren't Americans. So we hope that the quality doesn't go downhill because, America as an example of all that is right in the world, because I believe in American exceptionalism. But today, like Jesus in Philippians 2 hymn, we're going to kenosis ourselves down to the levels of someone from England, Ireland, and such. So anyway, you're going to be joined by tonight, Letting Sleeping Gods Die edition of the podcast, Kester Brewin, Peter Rollins, and the one and the only infamous and podcast favorite, Barry Taylor. So, yes. So we're going to begin. I found out that Barry, because he loves Kester so much, spent all night working on an arrangement of the perfect song that sets up his talk. See, that was my subtle way of saying, just shut up during this one part of the song. This is one of the serious times where you actually listen to the song and aren't obnoxious and drinking. But then after he gets done talking, you can be obnoxious and drink while you play songs. So, all right. He's done this because of his love for Kester Brewin.
True.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, Barry Taylor.
To Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pill and put your helmet on. Ground control to Major Tom. Commencing countdown, engines on. Check ignition and may God's love be with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade. And the papers wanna know whose shirt you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way. And the stars eyes look very different today. Here am I sitting in a tin can, far above the world. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do. Going past 100,000 miles, feeling very still, and I think my spaceship knows which way to go. Tell my wife I love her very much, she knows. Ground control to Major Tom, your circuit's dead, there's something wrong. Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? 'Cause here am I floating in a tin can, far above the moon. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do.
All right. So tonight, during letting sleeping gods die, it's going to begin and end with Kester because, well, honestly, he came up with the really sweet title, and then there was a really sweet graphic around it. And sometimes the best thing that makes an event is a vacuum, and then it is occupied. So sometimes when, I don't know, a master signifier or something dies, then eruptuous actions fill it up.
That's right.
And so Kester is going to start us off. Then when he gets done, Barry's going to, we'll chat with him for a few minutes about what he's doing. Then we'll play a couple songs, and you'll go get some more drinks and tip the bartenders well and such. And then Barry and I will do one of our, like, sleeping god things that hooks music that sets up Pete, then doing his little shtick, followed by questions. Then we sing, like, another song or two. You get another refill, empty your bladder.
It's almost
And
like
then,
church.
Well, if you're here, the Holy Ghost is, because there's no one that visits my house. So normally when we do these things, all these different people come through. We do live events and stuff. My son's favorite is Kester, because last time he was here, Pete, your newness is worn off.
Pete, you destroyed his Nerf gun barrier. All right.
So they had a party, and
you destroyed it.
If you play Nerf gun battle with a 6-year-old, and his grandfather, I don't know, by hand made multiple Nerf gun barricades and painted them camouflage, you should set a goal for yourself. Don't take Nerf battles so seriously you break a 6-year-old's thing his grandpa made him. That seems like a really good life lesson. I think we should all agree not to do that. Well, Pete got demoted, and he said, well, he's like, Kester never broke anything, plus he likes pirates and plays Legos. So now, the new pinnacle at the top of Elgin's 6-year-old assessment of theologians who may or may not visit my house, Kester Brewin.
Thank you. Because of Tripp's intro, I will threaten to do the whole thing in a Texan accent, which would be really... I won't let you suffer that. So the title, Let Sleeping Gods Die, it does actually mean something. It's not just a really smart title. Pete doesn't know that yet, but it did come from somewhere. But for me and myself and Pete and Barry, I don't know about Tripp so much, he's more of a process guy, but we're part of this idea of what we're calling radical theology. And there's been a criticism of that it's, in a sense, too passive. It deconstructs everything. but doesn't actually do anything. And I want to argue that it is entirely the opposite of that, actually. That this is all about, at its core, activism. And it is about activism precisely because it rejects the transcendent. Or, as I'm going to talk about a bit later, what I'm going to call the sublime move. So this links back to a book that I'm currently writing, which is kind of, I will say, slightly a labor of love about California. So you're in my heart, California. In my teenage years, I just couldn't get enough of, late 20th century American writing. And a lot of this has come really from my love of that literature. So the book is either going to be called On High or Getting High, depending if Pete gets his way. But it's a history of the human quest for altitude. Okay. And tied in within that is some kind of personal memoir stuff about my own desire for flight, for ecstasy, for escape. And it, in order to kind of tell that history, it kind of focuses down on 5 years at the sort of middle end of the 60s, where you've got, at the same time, this extraordinary couple of years, you've got the LSD counterculture, the whole kind of high thing there. You've got the Apollo missions to the moon. And also, 12 weeks after the moon landings, the very first message was sent between two computers. This was the birth of the internet. And the first message that was sent on the internet, as we call it now, or ARPANET, as they call it then, was meant to be log in. But the system crashed after 2 characters, so it was low. And there's this kind of beautifully angelic thing like, low, you have no idea what shit you have just unleashed. So that's really kind of what the book is about. It's about exploring this idea of our very, very ancient quest for altitude. And all of those 3 things in the 60s are really connected with our anxieties and fears that particularly grew up after the Second World War. You've got the Cold War, you've got the kind of whole nuclear threat, you've got this acceleration of industrialization and consumer capitalism. And, those things acted on different strata within society in different ways and produced different effects. But, me, born in 72, I was born after all of that, but intensely jealous of my brother who was born in June 1969, therefore 1 month old, saw the moon landings on TV. The bastard. And he was sat up, but I didn't get to see any of that, but I was just completely fascinated by it. Because I wanted to fly. I wanted to lift off and transcend. And if you don't mind, I will read you something from the opening of the book as is. This is the first time I've done this material, really, so if you think it's crap, tell me afterwards and I'll try and rewrite it. It is, it's already crap, I know. So this part of the introduction, it's about how when I was, how old? I was 6 or 7 years old, I went to see Star Wars, and I was taken there for my birthday, and this was like, oh my God. I lived in Yorkshire, which is up north in England, and it was all coal mines and that kind of crap, and people with flat caps. And there wasn't an airport anywhere nearby. I mean, this was just, so going to the movies to see this space film was like a really incredible thing. Here we go, I'll read a bit from the book. Nobody used the word blockbuster then. All I knew was that the queue was so monstrously long when we arrived that I was certain that we wouldn't get into the cinema. And the snakes twisted in my stomach again, and I sealed my lips to stop the worries getting out. I had to do that quite a lot. My older sister was very ill, and the doctors were very worried. And my brother, the eldest, was being bullied at school and was desperately unhappy, finding best release in goading and taunting me till he laughed and I screamed. Only later, I found out that he'd been persecuted because our dad was a vicar. And though Dad was a strong man, this made him apparently weak and feline. Their dads all worked underground in coal mines, or wrestled animals on the surrounding farms. They didn't wear dresses. My mum wore dresses. Dad was out a lot in the evenings during meetings, and Mum sometimes popped out too to see a neighbour, and that made my stomach twist even more, because even though I was 6 and I went to school, the whole playground hummed with talks about mums going missing and then being found dead, their dresses all torn by a man they called the Yorkshire Ripper. But the queue began to move, and miraculously we all snaked inside, past the ticket booth and into the cinema. No planes ever flew over my house. I don't remember ever seeing one. I couldn't have told you if there was even an airport within 100 miles. But that afternoon, I experienced flight. Weightless, I hardly touched my seat as spaceships zoomed and floated, darted and drifted free of gravity. Yes, I thought. Finally home, I slipped on a new pair of trainers with a sponge wedge in the heel. These will lift me off the ground. We didn't have money, but the vicarage had the largest garden in the village, and as I opened the door and the heady smells of the warm evening hit me, I could feel the mown grass in front and the pig shit from the farm next door and the roses and the silage, and I truly believed that I would jump up on my sponge wedges, tightly laced to my mercurial feet, and I would fly. Fly up away from my sister's illness and my brother's sadness and my parents' heavy anxiety. Fly up and away from the pits and the filth and the worry about the Ripper. Because we all have this lust for height. For well over 99% of human history, we have lived entirely flat lives. There have been ups and downs, of course, high mountains climbed by our distant ancestors and deep valleys explored. But even on these peaks or down in these troughs, the same grating thoughts that I'd had would come as birds soared and swooped. Why are we so clod-footed? Why must our souls remained shackled to the surface? So what I'm trying to do in the book there is talk about how each of these moves into height, whether it be drugs or space or digital technology, they're all driven by this desire to rediscover some kind of Eden. And actually that's very explicit. So you have these kind of shamans, very ancient shamans or priests. I mean, even now, being in California, I've talked about people, yeah, we do the God drug. And kind of get back to this extraordinary utopian place, these places of higher states of consciousness, accessing the divine. And back in the 60s, the summer of love. Talking about the kind of whole space travel thing, the guy who really made the first leaps into that was Johannes Kepler, who discovered the laws of planetary motion. Now, he was completely convinced that the Garden of Eden would be found on the moon. The reason being is that it's the only place high enough to have escaped the flood. And therefore, it must be sinless. It must be this utopian place. So if we could get to the moon, we would get back to God. Actually, Christopher Columbus thought he would find Eden in Venezuela, because that was about the highest place he'd ever seen, too. Werner von Braun, who bombed the shit out of my city of London by inventing the V2 rocket in Nazi Germany, then discovered Christianity and moved to America and became the whole thrust of the NASA missions, and he was the guy who put the guys on the moon with the Apollo stuff. But he declared that, once we had built space stations, there would be world peace. Because people would look down and see conflict and think, why are we fighting? He was very, very clear about that. And we see it with guys like Ray Kurzweil and his artificial intelligence ideas now that, the kind of whole digital technology extrapolated into the future, where this is a guy who wants to upload his consciousness into the cloud. So he will exist in digital form, immortal, knowing everything through Google, etc., and be basically omniscient. So that is a return to that kind of Edenic place. So the human quest for altitude, and I mean that in every way you can think. I mean, jumping off the ground, all of that stuff. I mean, anyone know the world high jump record? It's about 2.5 meters. Now, just put that into perspective. Nobody in the entirety of human history has ever, under their own propulsion, launched themselves higher than the low ceiling of a bedroom. Like the flies and stuff that get up here, we can't reach them without some other augmentation. And that really pissed people off for thousands of years. Like, we're so clever, but why can't we get up there? So the whole altitude thing becomes imbued with the spiritual. And then you get that means that technology becomes imbued with that same religious impulse to go up, to find height. Jump to the 60s and you have characters like Ken Kesey, one of my great heroes. He's part of the whole new technology, the new chemistry of psychedelics, and actually he's part of a much longer tradition going back through Aldous Huxley, a very good Englishman, and back through William Blake, who are all about kicking open the doors of perception and reconnecting with the divine transcendence and all this kind of stuff. And then I've talked about von Braun. NASA at the time, if you read the literature, it was a highly, highly religious environment. Buzz Aldrin, when they got to the moon, he broke bread on the moon. He took that in secret, but he wasn't sanctioned for doing so. There were guys reading Psalms, reading out passages of scripture. The guys on the Apollo 13 mission who never got to the moon, they had about 18,000 Bibles on microfilm that they wanted to take up there and take back down. There's a Bible society that were going to kind of distribute these things. It was a really, really, really strongly religious environment. And this is all wrapped up, actually, with a great battle for the kind of governing myth, because you've got godless communist Russia, in battle with the great Christian capitalist America, and it's a battle to win the mythic thing, But they're all pursuing this utopian ideal. They're all convinced that their technology would bring about world peace and a new world order, whether it's through drugs or digital something or through these space stations. But they're coming at it from a place of great anxiety, from economic alienation, Cold War, nuclear apocalypse, industrialization. So these technologies, the technologies of transcendence, are about relieving that anxiety. And actually, the governing dynamic of them all was about not solving those problems, but about escape. It becomes about escape. They wouldn't have phrased it that way. They would say things like, we're all going to get high, and then everyone will see how high we are, and then everyone will be able to be turned on, and, there'll be world peace by following our example, or stuff like, we'll go to the moon, and we'll build a space station, and people will see how futile conflict now is and world will end. But actually, what they're doing is deferring to a higher power. They are saying, we're going to escape up to this new place, and in that new place, everyone will then be able to see, wow, that's great, we're all going to end conflict and there'll be world peace. And it's what I call in the book the sublime move. Now, that again links back to California, but this time in the 1920s into the kind of Azusa Street revival and the whole Pentecostalism thing which kicks off then. Because here's a group of people who are totally disenfranchised. They have no opportunity for change. There's no change offered to them. They have no political power, they're completely oppressed. So what do? Rather than, they cannot work for any change, they make what's called a sublime move. They jump right up into a new state. They jump right up into the heavens, bypassing any kind of change at all. Now, the reason it's called sublimation is because in physics, there's a way of changing states from the solid state, bypassing the liquid state and going straight up into a gas. And it's that idea of bypassing something in between by changing something in that radical way. And this is what Pentecostalism did. It didn't change anything on the ground. They just accessed heaven direct. And actually, that is entirely what you see paralleled in things like the technological singularity, in the ideas you get in science fiction films, which are, perhaps possible true, about entering wormholes and, going directly to somewhere incredibly fast without any kind of change in between. Nothing on the ground changes. It's the same awful place. So what tends to happen in that move, and this is particularly involved in the charismatic movement because they just co-opted the Pentecostalism thing. You get the kind of black music of the blues is co-opted into the white rock and roll of the 60s, and they kind of trash the whole thing and change it and whatever. It's exactly the same thing with Pentecostalism. This kind of very, very kind of hardcore thing about these oppressed people then gets co-opted into the charismatic movement in the 60s, where you got white middle-class America saying, oh, we're so oppressed. We're going to, go straight into waving our hands and running around, doing all of that, all the holy-roly jumping stuff, and nothing actually changes. There's nothing on the ground, economically, politically, that changes at all. That charismatic thing, that is their counterculture. That is their Harley Davidson. That is them being the Hells Angels. That's their Apollo mission. That is white middle-class America's LSD trip. That whole kind of that whole charismatic thing. So what we have is this religious, transcendent, technological move is a God really of passivity, where nothing changes. But it's bound up in this kind of idea of frenetic pretense at great activity. Church is so busy, there's a meeting every night, and we're kind of falling over and jumping around, and the whole Toronto thing that I experienced myself, where nothing actually really happened. We have the godlike figures of astronauts, way up there, these incredible people, but kind of static, and the God drug and all of this. And Kurzweil talks about the artificial intelligence vision. He says this: the AI enterprise is a godlike one. The invention, the finding within of gods, represents our reach for the transcendent. Now that's just a huge, long history of the employment of technology to lift us off the ground. And the reason for that is, about 1,000 years ago, the kind of whole theology changes in that we understand that we have fallen, and again, it's about the vertical axis. We have fallen, so we need to get back up there. And what keeps us fallen? What holds us to the ground? Well, it's our bodies. It's this bloody mess of biology and, flesh. That's what keeps us on the ground, so that's bad. So any tool that we can use to lift us off that is good. It's godlike. It helps us towards transcendence. It lifts us away from the earth. 11th century Saxon theologian Hugh St. Victor puts it like this: the mechanical arts supply all the remedies for our weakness. A result of the fall, and like other branches of knowledge, they are ultimately subsumed under the religious task of restoring our true pre-fall nature. So, what we expect from our technologies isn't just convenience. I mean, what I expect from this is redemption. That's the Apple message. I mean, that's what they want. That's why their Apple stores look like fucking, operating theaters. This is already about a morgue. This is already about moving through death into something transcendent and something beyond, So we have the religion of technology, this stuff, but also the technology of religion. And they are the same thing. Both of them suggest that human redemption, that the kind of the perfection of the frail human flesh, the move to transcendence is done with tools. And that our bloody bodies are just something to be got rid of, augment them, get rid of them, upload myself into some digital thing. But the problem is that these transcendent moves leave the world unchanged, still in pain, still at war, still hungry. It's an escapist elite. Always, always an elite. Ken Kesey, he's kind of all the kind of big thing. Actually, in the end, he said, it's annoying that everyone wants to take LSD. I want it to be just the good people. Timothy Leary, all his kind of turn on, tune in, drop out. He wanted to limit numbers of people who could do that to 360. Similarly, who's going to be able to afford to upload themselves to a digital transcendent presence? Only the few. Only those, to quote one of my great heroes, Tom Wolfe, only those with the right stuff can become astronauts. It's the priestly thing. And it's exactly what the church has done. Okay? So these are the sleeping gods. These are the passive gods of transcendence who sleep up there on high, almost like up on Mount Olympus, having that little, rest. And they are elitist, they're passive, they're sublime, they're escapist, and those gods must die. Now, that death is nowhere played out better than in the film Gravity. Really, really extraordinarily powerful film. Technology in that film is insulating Sandra Bullock's character from her pain. She is up there, and Clooney's character says, "Why are you up here?" And she says, "Because it's silent." And you can see it's just quiet. She's got all these life support systems, all this technology keeping her alive. She is working, the film tells us, on a telescope, not to examine anything to do with the Earth, but to look further out into the universe, further than we've ever looked out before. As Barry sung with the Bowie song, "Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do." It's passivity. She is tethered to her machines, and actually she is tethered to this mature character of Clooney. You know, he is the godlike figure in that. He is the astronaut who knows everything, he's completely chilled out and everything. But it's all to protect herself from her own grief. We find out that she's lost a child, 4 years old, fell over in the playground, knocked her head, died. Utterly senseless death. There is no meaning to be found there at all. And all she does when she's not in space is drive in her car. When disaster strikes, the one thing she must do is to return to the earth. Clooney's character, who represents this God figure, it's not that she rejects him. He says, "You must let me go." And he unclips and casts himself adrift, knowing that that will kill him, but he does it in order to save her, in order that she can then return to the earth. She is like a star falling from the sky, and she crawls out of this primordial soup. It's really, it's a recreation myth. And when she crawls out of that primordial soup, she does so stripped of all these technologies, back on the earth to re-engage with that pain. Now that is the radical message of the incarnation. It's not that we move for this escapist thing and to draw in the glass thing. This is what Google Glass wants to do. It wants to augment us. And, it won't be long before we have algorithms. They will eliminate homeless people. You won't be able to see them on the sidewalk. Why should you? You don't have to. They will augment your reality, just like Facebook augments your timeline already. We will reject that technology of omniscience, of omnipotence, of immortality, because what the incarnation does in that radical move is to reject all of that, just as Jesus did, and to come to the earth to serve and to die. Now that is the active move. That's the move of the activist, not the pacifist who's up there kind of shaking their hands around and saying, "Oh, God's going to sort it out, and I'm really praying hard for Gaza." This is about an activism rooted in the earth. Now, Simon Critchley, who's a philosopher I'm very fond of, he hates Zizek as well, which is kind of good, He wrote a book called Infinitely Demanding. Now, he talks about how is it that we are generated into active subjects. What is it that creates us as a being? Really about, we're born as people, and it's about being reborn, actually. Now, he talks about how Alain Badiou says that Paul is generated as an ethical subject by this experience on the road to Damascus. The problem is that is a transcendent experience. In the book, he explores how that is problematic because it tends to lead people towards disappointment, but also into this escapism, into this passivity, that it's all about getting your name in the book that's going to get you up to heaven, escaping the earth. And the kind of counter film of that, which I won't go into now, is Elysium. You've got the kind of crappy, shitty earth down below and this perfect world up above. In that escapist mode, we're looking for the utopian Eden in high places. And just as LSD, just as technology does, it's that move up into the escapist passive. Instead, and in a bunch of emails I exchanged with him, he agreed that actually the radical theological move that we need to go for in Christianity is this. What should call us into being as ethical subjects is not that transcendent thing. It is the incarnation and the death of God. It is that move that we see played out in the film Gravity. Now, what is vital is that is not about rejecting the God of religion. This is an archetype. It shows us what to do more widely in the world. It shows us that we need to move to kill all gods. And that means kill your iPhone. It means kill the god of drugs. It means killing the god of capitalism too. It is, as he describes it, a move towards a continual questioning from below of any attempt to establish order from above. It is an activism that rejects that sublime move, the move to transcendence and escape. And because of this, importantly, it refuses to present a system that pretends to establish that order from above. Now, I get this all the time. I'm a union representative. Fight the power, brothers and sisters. I'm a union representative in education, and people say to me, oh, so what's your great idea? What should we have instead? No. I'm not here to offer you a system that you should put into action instead. All I'm here is to keep cutting down the systems that you keep putting up again and again and again and again. Any attempt to establish order from above, we cut it down in order that it can be refined in some way, somehow to improve. But that is the activist mood. Don't be disheartened when people say, oh, God, what's your great idea then? What should we do instead? That's not your job. The activist's job in a protest, in a piece of political action, is not to present that alternative move. It's to say, this is wrong. Cut it down, let's see what emerges instead. Now, this is the core of what I've, in other books of mine, have called tricksterism, or the pirate move. It is chasing down power structures and demanding that they reform. And this, as I try and explore in the book, is the move of Martin Luther King. Here is a guy who rejected that move to escape. He said in the last speech before he died, before he was shot, I have been to the mountaintop. And if you read the full speech, he's talking about Mount Olympus. He's talking about being up on that transcendent place. And does he want to stay there? And he says, no, I do not want to be there. If I could choose any place in history, I would be here with my people, demanding that there is justice. What made him dangerous was that fact that he came down from the mountain. You're not dangerous if you stay up on the mountain. You're not dangerous if you remain transcendent and passive and all of that. People can cope with that. People could cope with the Pentecostalists in the 1920s. It's not their fault. That's all they could manage. They could cope with that because it's just their sublime move up into that new place. What matters in the radical tradition is the move down from the mountain, down from transcendence. That is where the activism becomes dangerous and threatening because it refuses anything other than a more just world. Thank you.
Excellent. So, all that space will be edited out of the podcast, so don't worry. It'll look like we were
What, you mean the
sitting...
stuff about space or that space there?
all the parts I don't like.
I'm at your mercy here, Trip.
The last 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Kester, I really appreciated your confession as a genuine process theologian, and I'm sorry the tape didn't record it, but anyway, Barry, why don't you start off? I came up with 5 different ideas to help Kester's book.
Oh, really?
While I was talking.
Well, careful or Pete will steal them. So can we do this privately?
Yeah, it's okay. The 5 people that laughed.
Well, maybe just building, and I know this is something that you're tackling in your book, but I think it's an interesting thing. You know, there were a couple of major events at the end of the 60s, well, alongside of all this. So there were 2 significant pop culture events at the end of the 1960s, Woodstock and Altamont. Woodstock was the pinnacle of the countercultural move, the Festival of Peace and Love that they expected 50,000 and got 450,000. And if everybody that you ever knew went there, then all of America was there that day. But
I was there. I was born in 72, but I was there.
So you were there.
Yeah.
And then, and then a few months later, there was Altamont out here in Bakersfield, Rolling Stones, and it all went wrong. And many people say that was the end of the 1960s. But where I wanted to link this is that the defining music of that era was psychedelic music, and it was fueled by a fascination with transcendence, and particularly not just weed, but particularly LSD, which had become sort of mainstream countercultural de rigueur. It's the thing you did. And when the sort of hippie counterculture devolved, the music began to diversify. So at the end of the 1960s, pop music begins to split off into all these streams. And you get three major streams out of psychedelic music. You get progressive rock, you get heavy metal, and you get country rock. And those are the three developments that come out of late 60s counterculture. And country rock began in Southern California. And it's in Southern California that contemporary Christianity got its start, out of that countercultural fallout. And many of the early people engaged in the sort of Jesus movement and stuff were directly straight out of counterculture, and they brought their way of being with them and their desire for transcendence. And over a period of time, exchanged their LSD trip for the God trip. And you know, if you look at early Jesus movement literature, it's all about God being the high that the drugs used to be.
Yeah.
So what we have is basically the last 40 years of Christianity that most of us have all grown up in and been influenced by, essentially bathed in all the things that you've just addressed. So the whole focus of Christianity really has been not only on the transcendent God, but ecstatic out-of-body experiences. You know, close your eyes, forget about the world, forget about life. You know, Jesus will take care of all your troubles and all of those things. And I know, you know, we've talked a little bit, but I wondered if you had wanted to say anything about that more particularly than.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, in terms of the music stuff, actually, one of the things well, it's just one of my great passions, but there's a whole lot of stuff about the Beatles in the book. Can we hear it for the Beatles?
Yeah.
We better hear it for the Beatles. Now, when I was growing up, and I'm talking very, very young here, talking like age 4 or 5, my dad only had 2 Beatles albums. One was Les Beatles dans le quarto plus grand succès. It was a French Beatles greatest hits LP that he'd bought. It's worth $20,000 now. It was unbelievably rare. But I played that, and it had all their totally early tunes, and it was all like Chuck Berry covers and that kind of stuff. And then I had Sgt. Pepper. And I knew this was the same band. Mm-hmm. But what had happened? And quite, you know, obviously as I grew up, I realized what had happened. But that was the same move for me, is something happened that was ecstatic. Yeah. And I wanted to understand that ecstatic move. Now, kind of, if you look at the very first song that happens there, it is Ticket to Ride.
Yeah.
And Lennon saying, you know, she's got a ticket to ride and everything. And actually, this isn't about him having a trip. This is about him saying someone else's, and do I want to go on this trip? Now, you know, by the time they come to the States around this time, there's all sorts of interesting stuff going on there. Now, Ken Kesey invites the Hells Angels over to his joint, and they come. And it is, I would disagree about Woodstock. I think Woodstock is already over.
Sure.
I think for the purist, you know, the high point of the counterculture is when the Hells Angels go to Ken Kesey's and it works. Like, these people who are utterly different to them, totally different social class, they are the most feared people in California, if not the States at the time. They are brought into this trip of love and peace, and it works. Except it doesn't, because a couple of weeks later, they start beating up a whole load of people who are protesting against the Vietnam War. They volunteer to go to Vietnam and start busting a few faces and all the rest of it. And Kesey then is like, oh, that didn't work, but hold on, I'll invite the Beatles. So they go to a Beatles gig, he invites the Beatles, they don't come. And that's the first time that Kesey has ever done anything where it didn't work. His powers begin to diminish. And actually, they go through the whole kind of acid graduation. They want to move beyond acid. It's a complete failure. But everyone else only finds that out later on. So all of that actually leads into this vineyard Christianity.
Absolutely.
And it was that I was gradually, through reading all this American literature, was beginning to work out and thinking, whoa, this whole vineyard thing is looking more and more and more weird. And then you get the Toronto blessing coming along, and I didn't get gold teeth in my mouth. I would have sold them by now because I need the cash. But it's kind of come together into that to see that it was the precise same move. And yet, having then been there kind of, when the internet arrives. Now, I went to university, and a friend of mine in my third year, well, in my first year when I arrived there, they were like, oh, here's your Janet address. That was the Joint Academic Network, and I was given this kind of string of numbers. I was like, why the hell would I ever want that? I remember screwing up the piece of paper and chucking it in the bin. Like, why would I, that was an email address. I couldn't give a crap about that. By the third year, a friend of mine said, come and see the internet. And we stood by this computer terminal, and I'm like, what are we waiting for? Because we've been here 10 minutes and nothing's happening. So I was, but it's the same thing. That move for technology is the religious move, it's the transcendent move. And that came together with the whole kind of vineyard thing too, as an important rejection. But it's a positive one that leads us to activism. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Trip, you're nodding like you want to say something.
Larry Norman has a song back in the hippie days called "No More LSD for Me," and it sets up the perfect chapter setup for your book. No more LSD for me, 'cause I met the man from Galilee. I thought high was what I had, but now I'm in the I don't know. Anyway, I forgot it, but I did.
Can we get a rhyme there?
It's something about
I'm gonna look that
you're
up,
more
yeah.
high with baby JC than the LSD. So there are three different things that popped up in my head, and I'll just say them, and then you can respond to whatever, because they're more or less baits into you saying something that I am interested in.
Bait me, brother.
So one was the appropriation of technology, critique, and culture and transcendence. The way that religion is, and that happened. Anyway, from a Christian perspective, the account of religion and technology were both very Gnostic, and so, but regardless of whether the Gnosticism is practiced, at least in the tradition of Christianity, they would have been joining you in almost everything you said. The secularist critique is actually towards people of privilege who have the means in a kind of consumer capitalist society to practice escapism.
Yeah.
The demarker that would be interesting to pursue is practicing escapism without debt. Because if you look at recent kind of what it is people will go in debt for, and what if you're on food stamps or limited income you spend money on, they are very much the devices of escapism.
Yes.
So in a sense, like Spotify and Netflix are demonic. You can pick that theme up and explore, because that fits with your theme.
Take the film Elysium. You've got the terrible earth, and that's then used to give the energy to this perfect paradise place up there. That's us with our iPhones and the people in Foxconn making them. We are already farming the energy of poor people in developing countries in order that we can have this kind of capitalist escapist thing. It's happening now. And the technology is already being there, with the whole kind of glass thing. I talked a couple of days ago about this thing called Lives On. Is anyone on Lives On? So it's a Twitter thing you can sign up for, and it will use artificial intelligence to look back over your Twitter feed. And then when you die, when your heart stops beating, we'll keep tweeting. It will carry on tweeting on your behalf. Okay? That is already a kind of move to that kind of immortality thing.
So if you tweet a pic that gets liked a bunch, like they put a lot of stars on it, then every 9 months
I was relieved.
Flies across the screen.
I was relieved to arrive in California to find you're still alive, because who knew? It could have been. Your Twitter feed's fairly standard. I wake up in the morning in London with the time delay. I just look at everything Trip's been drinking that night before. But artificial intelligence could make that stuff up. I didn't know if you were still alive or not. But it's about that pursuit of immortality. Yeah.
So I have one more question. I'll let Barry talk the rest, because about the MLK reading of From Above. I would just say go read Ernst Bloch's reading of the Transfiguration, and Ernst Bloch and Jürgen Moltmann both make a very similar reading of the Transfiguration, and say that Jesus at the Transfiguration, after the whole kind of move up to his self-conscious decision to go to Jerusalem in the Synoptic Gospels, knowing he's going to meet the cross, up to that point, the disciples are slowly connecting the dots and junk, And then up there, like, you have the image, the vision of the law and the prophets show up with Moses and Elijah. And the disciples go, wow, man, this is great. We finally reached the heights we were always ready for, Jesus.
Yeah.
So let's pitch a tent. We can hang out with Moses, Elijah, JC. This is freaking awesome. We finally figured out the three persons of the Trinity. And Jesus is like, what's your problem? No. We're setting our eyes towards Jerusalem. The very next scene in at least two of the three synoptic gospels is Jesus comes down out of it, and they're kind of pissed. Like, why you're finally hanging out with the people we should have been hanging out with all the time. They're like way above our pay grade, and you're the Messiah. But honestly, like, you're like the comeback of Moses, right? Like, so just you should have stayed up there and hung out and camped with him. But they're going, and he goes, no, the Son of Man has come to meet a material end in the center of power in Palestine.
Absolutely.
And then Peter goes, this is crazy as shit, right? Like, he blows a gasket, and Jesus goes, whoa, get behind me, Satan. So I think at the very heart of the gospel, the turn towards the cross in the synoptics, is an insistence that religion turns towards the material. And the very people who met the incarnate Logos on the journey towards the cross were going, whoa, let's check out now. We finally got high enough. Transfiguration.
Yeah.
And Ernst Bloch, who is, the Christianity read by an atheist, and Jürgen Moltmann both go, no, the turn is towards the material. And that's precisely the place you're going. And the transfiguration is the perpetual reminder that people of religion are always ready to opt out for Gnosticism.
That's it. Yeah. Do you want to say something, Barry, or should we get Pete up? Or have a drink or something?
Well, just really quickly, I think the sense in all of this, in the things that you and I and Pete and others have really been working towards, is essentially to say that there is another read and another take on all of this stuff, right? That's the simple thing, and that in some way it seems to me that within the horizons of the culture in general, there are two moves going on. There's a continuation of the old move that constantly seeks to overcome, to transcend, to get past. And then there's this other move which seeks essentially to materialize reality in a different way. But maybe we should take a drink break and then.
So the only thing I'll say on that, this is not to say that we shouldn't have high experiences.
Yeah.
But the original guys who went up in the hot air balloons, this is kind of 18th century, they went up in order to come down, and that's kind of interesting. They saw their elevation, a limited elevation, as a way of empathizing with what was going on below. And I think that's the thing. It's go up to come down. And to appreciate that technologies draw out of ourselves certain desires. And as, I'm not going to get into too much Heidegger here, partly because I don't really know him too well, but he says it's about our orientation towards this stuff.
Sure.
Like, your iPhone is not evil, but you need to orient it not towards escape, but towards empathy and activism. And it can do that. It can do that.
Yeah.
There is an app for that.
Well, actually, there isn't an app for that, and that's precisely the point.
Yeah, exactly.
I think app technology is...
Yes. It tries to take you out. Yeah. And don't go buying Google Glass, because that is the beginning of the lens through which you will see an algorithmed reality that is going to be about escape. That's the beginning. Yeah.
All right, brilliant.
What's
so
next?
With drink break, back, then Pete, then we talk Peter.
Boom.
So go get a drink.